our history, we were originally a people who were under the rule of kings and queens, royalty. And when we were in that status, even during the Revolutionary days, or before the Revolutionary days, it was the king's responsibility to solve all of the problems. And as a result, the general public didn't really need this information about how their government works, because they had no power to make decisions anyway. Now, as time went on, they developed this power, and eventually, as we all know from history, we overthrew our king. And that means that we now need this information. We have to be our own king. We have to be the king of our own life. And as a result, open government becomes progressively more important to us. I got involved in open government. Well, first of all, I was a reporter for many years and an editor, and then I had a business where I worked as a freelance editor. I was involved with the Society of Professional Journalists, which, by the way, today is having its regional meeting in New Brunswick, and I just came up from that, and I'm going back to it afterwards. We were, a couple of us who were more active in the organization were contacted by a reporter from the Associated Press named Mark Middlestad. This was in 1999. And he wanted to meet with us. So I met with him and Joe Terrell, who was one of our members. And we had lunch together. And he had been part of an open government initiative in the Southwest. I think it was New Mexico. And he said New Jersey needs an organization that should push for open government, sort of become a rallying point for open government. And he suggested something along the lines of what we founded, which was the Foundation for Open Government. The acronym is FOG. The idea is to lift the fog of government. The way we did it is kind of unusual. The Society of Professional Journalists is a great organization, and one of the things it requires of all of its chapters, and I'm talking now about the New Jersey Professional Chapter, is that every year they should have what they call a First Amendment project, something to push the First Amendment. It could be something simple, like one year we made coffee cups that had the First Amendment on them. That was a real easy way of getting rid of our requirement for the year, and that went in our report. Other years we've held conferences on the First Amendment, which is a lot more trouble than having coffee cups made up. So we took on probably the most difficult assignment, was to create an entirely new organization that was based on the idea of getting government to open. And that was the Foundation for Open Government. And Joe Terrell served as the first president of it. And we immediately had our work cut out for us, because the reason we founded it was to get the Open Public Records Act passed. Now, I don't know where everybody is with the Open Public Records Act and whether you've had experience with it, but before the Open Public Records Act, known as OPRA, there was it was very difficult to find out what was happening in government. Over the years, I think the public has come to expect more information from their government than they used to get. When I was a reporter in the 70s, there was no Oprah, and usually government documents came to me by somebody meeting me in a parking lot at night, or handing me something, or making friends on the inside and turning them to help. I thought I was quite successful, but I had no idea what an avalanche of material was being held back by the government, stuff that, if you don't know that the item exists, you don't know to ask for it or to seek it. So we got on the bandwagon. Now, the way the Open Public, John will talk more about the nuts and bolts of the Open Public Record Act, but I'm just kind of filling you in on the background. The Open Public Record Act, the law for it, the bill for it, had been around about 20 years, and it was still a bill. It wasn't the law yet. And it had been carried along by the New Jersey Press Association, which is an organization made up of most of the publishers of New Jersey newspapers. And they had done it in a kind of traditional old white guys method where they would press their local senators and assemblymen for getting it on the agenda and speaking about it. They would, if they didn't like a decision that was made by the federal government, by the state government, they would editorialize about it. So they'd run some blistering editorial, and over time, the legislators started to realize that these editorials didn't seem to have much effect. If they would say, we think Senator so-and-so was wrong for not voting for this, in the old days, when newspapers had a lot more influence, the senator would probably expect to see pickets in front of his office the next day, but as time went on, this disappeared. So it became apparent to us that this law wasn't going to get passed this way. So what we did initially with FOG was to create an organization of organizations. We had the American Civil Liberties Union in it, the League of Women Voters, Common Cause, the Citizens Campaign. These are publicly, ACLU, I said that. These are publicly spirited organizations that wanted to help, but they were each helping in their own way, and they weren't actually playing the same tune. So we kind of educated all these people and explained how important the Open Public Records Act would be. And as a result, when bills were brought forward and needed testimony, instead of just having the lobbyists from the New Jersey Press Association testify, we had our own officers testify. We asked ACLU to go in, the League of Women Voters. So now it seemed like all these, and it was true, all these organizations were pushing for this law. It wasn't just a bunch of newspaper publishers. So it got passed. At the last minute, though, the Open Public Record Act, I think the legislature started to wake up about 60 seconds before final passage and realized that this was going to be big. And a lot of stuff was going to become public. So the legislature itself added a little codicil at the end, which said, okay, we're going to vote for it, but it will affect everybody except us. So the legislature itself does not have to come forth with records in the same way that local municipal governments, county governments, boards, associations, and so forth. And as a result of that, the New Jersey Press Association decided to pull its support at the last minute. But I think the ball was already rolling and it got passed. So it's passed without that aspect to it. Now there are new versions of it in the legislature right now. John knows much more about it than I do. But that would be fixed in the new legislation. It would affect that, right? It would affect the legislature. And they'll probably pull it out at the last minute. So what this law, the importance of this law is really hard to overstate. It added to a law that existed in New Jersey. It's not really a law, it's a concept of law called the Common Law Right of Access, which, like I say, John is an expert on. Now, the Common Law Right of Access is something that never really was passed as a law. It was sort of a compendium of laws. It goes back to England, where as court decisions are made, it's sort of like a Talmud for the law. As court decisions are made, certain analyses are drawn from it, and courts make decisions based on law, and then those decisions sort of become new law. And as a result, there's this thing called the Balancing Act has developed. Now, the way it works under the Common Law Right of Access is if you need a document, and if the government entity that has the document doesn't want to give it to you, you can sue them in court. You have to go to Superior Court, it costs a couple $100, and in court, you have to show that your need for the document outweighs their need to keep it unpublic. Okay, that's what the Balancing Act is about. Now, usually, if you're a journalist, the court will decide in favor of the journalist, because the journalist is going to be writing a story for thousands of people, and if the document was kept in a file cabinet somewhere, it wouldn't affect anybody. So therefore, the Balancing Act is much more important for the journalist. But what if you're not a journalist? What if you're this new thing called a citizen activist? which is a very interesting, I don't know what you call it, avocation. When I was a reporter, we used to call these people who went to public meetings gadflies. You know what a gadfly is? It's the fly on the rear of a horse. You know, and they're really necessary because the horse needs it, but it's annoying to the horse. So that's what gadflies are. But now we've elevated these people and we've called them citizen activists, which is, I think, is merited. And they don't have the same privileges of going to court and saying, well, I'm just one guy and I want this record. And it makes it much harder for this person to go to court and win, especially because when the Star Ledger goes to court, they can pay lawyers. But the average person going to court doesn't have hundreds of dollars to file, and to hire an attorney could be thousands of dollars, right? So the Open Public Record Act concept was that that would be eliminated. If you ask for a record, and this is one of the great strengths of Oprah, that the document is assumed to be on the record unless it's taken off the record. Now, the old system was the only records that were available to the public were ones that were put on the record. For example, tax records or budgets have been available to the public for a long time. But now the tables were turned, and now what we were saying was all documents would be on the record unless the legislature or the governor would shut them down and say this category of documents is not going to be public, and they would have to justify it to the public. At least politically they would. So in 2002, this bill was passed and signed into law by a governor, probably most of you forgot, Donald DeFrancesco. Does that sound familiar? He used to like to be called Donnie D. I was there for the signing. It was a lot of fun. But what happened was, when you go to court now, and here's how the law works. If you want a document, and the entity, let's say the municipal clerk doesn't want to give you the document, you can go to this organization that was created in the law called the Government Records Council, which is free. And you have to go through a system where they assign, what do they call the person who assigns? Case manager, and they try to work it out. They try to talk to the clerk or the custodian, and they try to develop a relationship so that you can get the document or find out at least what the reasoning is why you can't. This could take a long time, maybe up to a year or more, okay, all right. Or you don't have to go to the Government Records Council. You can file a lawsuit in Superior Court. Now, why would you want to do that if it's so costly? Well, the way Oprah was set up, it has this item in it called a fee-shifting provision. And what that means is that you pay your own lawyer for going to court, but if your lawyer wins, the losing party, which would be the custodian of record of the document, would have to pay your lawyer. Now, what's developed over the past couple of years is that a whole group of lawyers have come forward and say, I want to do Oprah cases. Because when you find out what the circumstances are, you're a lawyer, you find out what the circumstances are. The clerk won't give me this document. Well, what's the document? X. Okay, well, I know the Oprah law. The Oprah law is really, 12 pages? It's really not much to read. I know the Oprah law. I know all the case law. I am totally convinced that the clerk has to give up this record. The clerk is just being intransigent on this. So I will take your case. And then they win because they know the law. They're accustomed to these cases in the past. Sometimes the attorney for the city doesn't really understand the law as well, and they go in, and the winning attorney, your attorney, may make $10, $20, $30, $50, $100,000 on this, and it doesn't cost you a cent. So it's really great. Now, there's a companion law called the Open Public Meetings Act, which controls access to public meetings, boards, commissions, councils, and so forth. And that doesn't have the fee-shifting provision on it. As a result, there have been very few cases over the years where people will actually take a municipality, a county government, and so forth to court and say, you should have opened that meeting, you should have allowed us to read the minutes from that closed meeting because a certain period of time has gone by, and so forth. and they say, well, you don't like it, sue us. And you can either sue them yourself, or you can go to the county prosecutor and say, you know, they broke the law and they should be sued. And the county prosecutor is covering, you know, murders, rapes, things like that. A closed meeting is sort of down on the scale, and usually, because it's highly political, you know, the person who was closing the meeting probably had some hand in appointing the prosecutor. These things just don't get done. The only significant case that got done was a case that a Rutgers graduate who attended Rutgers Board of Governors meetings found very offensive. Was the Board of Governors had this policy where they would have an open meeting, and then at the open meeting they would say, well, you know, we just came across an issue that's closed. That's a private issue. So we're gonna, everybody in the audience, we're gonna close the meeting, and when we're done talking, we'll come back. And they go in the back room, and like everybody would just be sitting there, and they'd sit there, and like hours would go by. And then, you know, in the meantime, some people started to go home. Some people were late for appointments or whatever. And then the board would come back and they'd say, okay, we're going to vote on something now. And then after that, we're going to close the meeting again. Well, they did this monkey business back and forth for a long time, until finally this graduate said, I'm going to pay for a lawyer to take this to court, and he won. And they said that the Board of Governors has to be more organized in the way it closes its meetings, because what it's effectively doing is getting rid of the audience. If I were to say to everybody in this room, we're going to pick this conference up at 6 o'clock this evening, how many would stay? Most people wouldn't. So that was the technique they were using to really shoo people out. So one of the other strengths from the Open Public Records Act is that it governs the cost of photocopies. If you need a copy of a document under a court decision, which, you know, John knows everything about this, the citation and everything, is 5 cents a copy. And that was a big victory. We testified about that. They originally wanted it to be, and it was, $1 a page for the first 10, and then it goes down to 50 cents for the next 10, 20, something like that, and then it goes to 25 cents forever after that. So if you wanted like a 500-page document, that's going to cost you like $100, you know, maybe $125. So that was eliminated. But you know what's even nicer about it is that if you make an Oprah request by email, they have to answer you by email, and they can't charge you for any copies. So you can just write in and say, I need a certain document and so forth. As long as you meet their requirements to say what it is you need, and you're relatively specific about it, you should get that request fulfilled. So there are some drawbacks, though, to the Open Public Records Act. I teach the investigative reporting class in the New Brunswick campus, and one of the problems we have, and I think a lot of people have, is in order to ask for a record, and the way Oprah works is, you can only obtain records that exist. I know that sounds funny, but you can't say, I would like a copy of all of the students' addresses who live in all the dorms at Rutgers University on all campuses. And they may say to you, well, I'm sorry, there's no such document like that. So they don't have to create a document for you in order to fulfill your request, which means you have to know what document you want. And they're very slangy about this sometimes. Like for years, we were asking for, now this sounds to me pretty obvious, the Rutgers budget. Okay? And I would get back a letter saying, sorry, no such document. No such document, you know? Well, can you explain what you mean by no? No, we don't have, we don't give you advice. We just tell you that we don't have this document. Well, it turns out they don't call it the budget. They call it the financial statement. Okay? So how do you know that, right? So this is a problem that my students have run into. And one of the things we've done is we found a website.
Ron, you've gone about 20 minutes, so another 5 minutes.
5 minutes, no problem. Yep.
Okay.
What we've done is Rutgers has a website, and the state of New Jersey has another website called Requirements for Retaining Records. Okay, so here's how it works. If you file a certain form in your with your municipal clerk, the clerk has that form, and they go to this website, and the website says, you must retain this record for 5 years, or 10 years, or forever. Like birth certificates never are given up, but other records can be thrown away after a certain period of time. Okay, that's nice to know. But what is most important to know is it lists the names of the documents that you have to retain. And you can take those names and say, I request this name. And they should have that record because that is the official name. So Rutgers has this list. Most government entities have a website that lists retention schedules. So that's pretty much what I wanted to start out by talking about, except that what's been very helpful to me and my students is to learn Excel in order to understand some of these records, because now you can get a lot of these records in their original CSV formats or in Excel formats. It's wonderful if you go on the federal website. If you go to census.gov, for example, they have literally millions of Excel documents you can play with, and you can reorder, and you can change, and you can develop trends from. So it's really wonderful, and I think we're at the very, very beginning of open government in New Jersey, and I think we have years and years to go yet, and a lot more information to obtain from our government.
A sort of a personal note, in teaching some courses here and have students doing some detailed papers on education, the New Jersey Department of Education has an enormous amount of information on their website. You can find out how many teachers are in each school, what the scores are in each school, what they spend in each school. But this varies, by department. Okay, I'd like to now introduce John Path, Chairman of the New Jersey Libertarian Party's Open Government Advocacy Project. And John is going to talk about Oprah and the common law right of access.
It was pretty much the same thing Ron just talked about, so I said I'd come up with something new. Basically, you need Oprah, and you need right to government access, because there's only two ways you're going to get information from the government. You're either going to demand it and get what you want, or the government is going to tell you voluntarily that information which it wants you to know. Governments historically have been disinclined to give out information, particularly that is embarrassing to the people in power. So you need to find out this information if you're going to adequately monitor your government. And the way that we've done this traditionally, and it's still the way that it's been, like Ron mentioned, back from the common law that we inherited from England, was the common law right of access. And yes, you can go down and file a lawsuit and get records under the common law right of access. One of the drawbacks is it is not yet clear until Path versus Garwood is decided by the Supreme Court whether there is attorney fee shifting when you win a common law right of access case. What is clear right now, though, is that under the Open Public Records Act, with the statute that was passed in 2002, there are attorney fees available, and they must be paid if the government loses the case and the plaintiff, the citizen plaintiff, wins. In the legislature right now is a bill, I think it's Senate 2512, that would change the shall, what currently says attorney fees shall be paid to the successful party, to may. If that passes, it is probable that attorneys will no longer take these Open Public Records Act cases, because now they can take a case for a poor person on the strength that they will certainly win. They will get paid. If it turns to may, and there's hesitation and doubt as to whether the attorney is going to get paid, attorneys will not take these cases unless the citizen plaintiff puts up money, their own money, in order to get the record, or at least to guarantee some payment for the attorney. Most citizens, even citizen activists as myself, we can't tolerate spending thousands of dollars in order to get a government record. We have to have fairly, it's not fair when the government has all your own tax money to pay to resist the lawsuit for public records, and you have to dig into your own pocket. So It would be a wrong-headed move for the state legislature to put May into the Open Public Records Act statute. Everything else in the Senate Bill 2512 I don't think is really consequential. There are a few improvements. It would make the Government Records Council, which is now doesn't function that well. It would put a few more members on it, and it would make them more representative of the record requester community. Right now, it's essentially dominated by those who have a vested interest in government secrecy. And currently, the Government Records Council, I don't recommend anybody file a complaint with the Government Records Council, GRC. It takes 18 months or so to get the cases from the time you file the complaint to an adjudication. And the OPRA guarantees that one of the first things that OPRA says is that it's a state public policy that we should have ready and prompt access to government records. Prompt does not mean waiting a year and a half for an adjudication. So until the GRC gets itself together, now the new bill will allow litigants whose complaints have languished for at least 150 days in the Government Records Council to withdraw their complaints and file them in Superior Court. As a practical matter, the way it currently works in Superior Court is if you file an action in Superior Court, if you file an order to show cause, you'll generally be in front of the court in about 6 to 8 weeks, perhaps a little longer. And right then, you'll get an adjudication as to whether you're going to win the case, in the typical case. So, the way in which the people that do this do it is we file OPRA complaints. We request the records under both the OPRA and the common law right of access. And if we were denied, we file a 2-count complaint in Superior Court, one under the OPRA and one under the common law right of access. And the third thing we ask is we demand the attorney's fees. And through this process, we were able to make some progress. A long while back, I think it was 2003 or 2004, I found that Edison Township in Middlesex County was charging $55. I wanted the meeting minutes of their township council, and they would be happy to give them to me on paper at 75 cents a page for the first 10 pages, and 50 cents a page for the next 10 pages, and 25 cents per page thereafter. But when I asked to put it on a floppy disk instead of writing it to the printer, filing it or saving it on a floppy. We used floppies back then. They said they would do it, but only if I paid a $55 service charge. And this is where the attorney fee thing becomes key. We lost the trial. The trial judge decided that $55 was reasonable. He did not see that offended the principle of open records as defined by the Open Public Records Act. He found that it was. On appeal, went to the appellate division. It was Libertarian Party of Central New Jersey versus Raina Murphy at Clark of Edison. And they found that really the only purpose, that the $55 was not reasonable given the floppy disks at the time cost between a quarter and 50 cents a piece. And the only rationale for the $55 charge was just simply to discourage the public from accessing records. So that was a case that, had we not had attorney fee shifting provision, and the attorney would have gone to the long haul, it's likely that I would have probably given that case up after the loss in the trial level. We were probably already $10,000 in at that point. And to think, well, how do we really go for an appeal? And that's the type of thing, that's why it's important. We had attorneys who were then on the hook. We didn't pay them anything. We just said that if you win, you get paid. If you don't, we don't owe you anything. Another similar case was Asbury Park Press versus Monmouth County, and I filed Path versus Monmouth County, their companion cases. It dealt with a lawsuit settlement agreement. The way it works is that governments often, governments get sued a lot. The police especially get sued a lot for allegations of harassment or excessive force or false arrest and things of the like. And what they do in a lot of cases is they require the defendant, when they do finally settle the case, almost all the cases settle, to sign a confidentiality agreement.